Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this review, I'll be discussing Mort by Terry Pratchett. This continues my series of reading the early Discworld novels. As you may have seen if you saw my other videos, the first I put up was Guards. I then read The Light Fantastic, Equal Rights, and now on to Mort. Mort is a very interesting concept, and I think honestly the most interesting concept so far in the books I've got to. And basically, the plot is death, the anthropomorphic personification of death, is looking for an apprentice. There have been jokes in some of the other Discworld novels about how death really only shows up for wizards or like really important people, and most of the harvesting of souls is delegated out to others. And so this kind of plays off of that, and we actually see Death looking for an apprentice because he's ready to pass on some more and take some additional time off. So already the premise is just, you're going to be in for an interesting ride. Very interesting premise. And I have to say, the dialogue in this book is my favorite dialogue, hands down, out of any of the Discworld novels I've been through so far. Granted, I know that's not that many of them, but there's been quite a variety in the first 5 that I've read. And the dialogue here is just fantastic and was really my favorite part about the whole book. Now, the problem for me is that the story kind of suffers. If you saw my previous Discworld videos, I did talk about how the color of magic really didn't suck me in, and it just kind of felt like it was all over the place. There was a lot of humor, but the story seemed very secondary to the humor in general. And The Light Fantastic, I thought, kind of followed in the same vein. The plot was not really the center of what was happening. It was more so just a vehicle for the humor. Now, I definitely get to expect that to an extent with Pratchett. It's the whole idea of his absurdist parody fantasy. But that's why I was so wonderfully surprised when I got to Equal Rights, and that book had just a very tight, clean story and did a really good job of still having a lot of humor, but also having that story be the forefront. Mort did feel like a little bit of a step back because while, like I said, the dialogue was just fantastic, the story, or lack thereof, really seemed to stall. There's not a whole lot that happens, and I will be doing a spoiler section to talk about this in a little bit more detail a bit later. I will warn before I get there, but suffice it to say for now, the plot was definitely a lot weaker in this book, though the humor was very, very good. So I do want to comment, and I will not get into spoilers at this point still, but I do want to comment on some of my favorite bits of dialogue, and I'm going to be kind of vague here. And really, a lot of them have to do with Death and the way that Death talks. Very early on, Death is having a conversation with Mort's father when he's looking at taking him on as an apprentice, and just the bit of dialogue there, really, really great. And then also later on, basically where Mort is trying to talk in all caps like Death does, and that joke continues on throughout. It's the talking in all caps or not talking in all caps, and really, really well done, and those were some of my favorite bits throughout. Now, I will do, as has become my tradition, I'm going to read out a few of my favorite kind of one-off passages that don't require any context, and so I'm going to do that now before I get into the spoiler section. Most of the stall keepers had packed up and gone. Even the hot meat pie man had stopped crying his wares, and with no regard for personal safety, was eating one. So that's the first one there from earlier in the book. The second one I'm going to preface with, in the story there are 4 dashes for this section. I'm just going to do them as blanks. But we have, well, me, he said, ing wizard. I hate ing wizards. You shouldn't them, then, muttered one of his henchmen, effortlessly pronouncing a row of dashes. So just a fun joke about the fact that it's dashed out in the text, and then that nice fourth wall break where it's clarified that's actually what he said. And then finally, a little film joke. "You're a wizard. I think there's something you ought to know," said the princess. "There is," said Death. Parentheses. That was a cinematic trick, adapted for print. Death wasn't talking to the princess. He was actually in his study, talking to Mort. But it was quite effective, wasn't it? It's probably called a fast dissolve or a cross-cut zoom or something. An industry where a senior technician is called a best boy might call it anything. End parentheses. That I thought was very fun. Obviously, as I've commented, very familiar film trope, and so I thought it was really entertaining to see a film trope translated to text, which is not something you would normally expect to see. So quite enjoyable, I thought, there. With that, I'm going to get into some spoilers a little bit. The big part is I am going to talk about the end and my opinions on it. So at this point, if you do not want to hear the spoilers, check the description and I will have in there the timestamp where you can skip past the spoilers and back to the end of the video with the summary. With that, I am going to get started. Now, really, like I said, the plot in this story really left something to be desired. It was still a very enjoyable read, but that was really just difficult. I do like a nice story, a nice plot, and I know Pratchett can do it because there has definitely been a good plot in some of the others. So kind of going back to just more for fun versus having the plot was a little bit hard. The big thing really was that the whole idea of Mort is becoming Death's apprentice, and we start to see throughout that he's actually becoming Death, and Death is no longer Death, and they're kind of swapping places, and that's the general idea. There's a lot that's talked about with time and this and that, but the main idea is Mort is kind of taking over, but on his first assignment, he did not kill a princess he was supposed to. Granted, Death doesn't technically kill, he just harvests the soul and kind of allows it to happen. But he didn't do it, and instead he did kill the assassin who was going to kill her. So there's a problem, and reality is trying to fix it. This really reminds me of The Light Fantastic, where reality had to reset itself because it couldn't allow Rincewind to die. And so not the most original, but that's then kind of from there. They're trying to figure out a way to fix it. He doesn't want to have to kill the princess, but he has to do something because reality is kind of closing in around her, trying to fix itself. We get to the end, and Death ends up coming back and kind of taking back over, and Mort ends up taking the princess and the wizard and coming into Death's domain, where he's just trying to keep him there for really kind of no reason, and it didn't make that much sense. Him and Death are now going to duel to decide the fate, and they do, and Mort loses, but Death apparently off-screen talked to the gods and just said, no, it's okay, you guys can all have a happy ending. And all of a sudden, even though the whole book Mort has been trying to save this princess that he's in love with after seeing her once, no, now she's going to marry the wizard, and they're going to have their kingdom, and Mort is going to marry Death's daughter, and yeah, and it's just all fine. That all kind of happened, and I will say you do get hints throughout that Isabel, Death's daughter, is kind of interested in Mort, and there was, of course, the great joke of Death trying to set up Mort and Isabel, which also a great scene of dialogue and great descriptions there. But the ending just really didn't fit and left a lot to be desired. Really, the ending was probably my biggest problem with this book. It, to me, felt a lot like the classic kind of gag with Monty Python sketches, where it's a really funny sketch, but they don't really know how to end it, so they just kind of do it abruptly, whether or not it fits. That's how the end of Mort really felt for me. And it was definitely disappointing, even though this was a very fun book. And I'm really interested to read the other books in the Death series because of the dialogue and hopefully better story overall as well. That was really kind of my reaction to Mort, though. Once again, very enjoyable, but I much prefer the books where there's more plot going on. And I really hope to see that again. The other big thing here, though, was we do get to see Rincewind briefly in this book. Now, I'm not really considering that a spoiler. I'm not mentioning anything with it, but we briefly see Rincewind The problem there being that it completely also skews the timeline. And we're out of the spoiler section now, so we won't get into specifics. But time was really important, but we saw in The Light Fantastic that Mort was already in Death's realm at that point. So that coupled with the fact that that very clearly has to have taken place after, or at least during, the events of Mort, it just kind of messes everything up. So, in summary, weekending, timeline issues, not great. The dialogue and humor throughout, though, some of the best I've read so far. So it's still a very enjoyable book. This is definitely one you'll have to kind of overlook some issues with, though, in reading it. That said, that is my review of Mort. I'm going to be taking a break from Discworld for a bit now. I have a lot of other books that I want to read. I've been doing this in between some others, but I have a lot I want to get through, so I'm going to jump into some other books and series, and then I will definitely be jumping back to Discworld. I still have at least 3 more that I already own that I need to read. So there will be more Discworld videos, but they might not be for a little bit. If you did like this video, feel free to give it a like, and if you do want to see other videos, more of this content, then feel free to subscribe.